So before anything else, just want to kind of introduce a little bit about Topple, what our perspective is in the space, everything like that. So Topple is a layer 0. For those of you maybe a little bit less familiar with the blockchain space, a layer 0 is a layer 1, so like an underlying blockchain, but think more multifunctional, or think about the idea of being able to have part of your network optimized for one thing, maybe like biodiversity, and another part of the chain fully optimized for tracking and counting carbon credits, for example. So that's what an L0 is, and we're an L0 that's exclusively focused in the impact and sustainability space, meaning that basically every single engineering decision, every single design decision we've made from the last 5 years has been optimized to say, how can we best empower, how can we best support impact and sustainability projects? So that's everything from our underlying consensus layer, which we made to be as inclusive as possible, to how we designed like our ledger and our accounting system, to our smart contract language, all the way up to our tokenomics and asking the question like, how can the protocol itself help fund some of these initiatives? So that's what Topple is, that's who we are. And our perspective on the space is really, I'd say captured by the slide that I have right here. If we think about how impact works today, it's in a lot of ways like a failed flywheel. That every time you want to have more positive impact, you have to put more money into the system. For every amount of impact, for every amount of carbon I want to capture, every piece of the rainforest I want to save, it's always fresh money, fresh budget that needs to be allocated. The world that Topple envisions and what we're working towards is we want to close that loop, we want to close that flywheel. And we want to say the only way that positive impact sustainability can really reach the levels that it needs to is if it becomes, profit generating. If we can capture the money and the profits and the benefits from one turn of the wheel and use it to power the next turn of the wheel. And that's really our perspective on the space, is saying how can blockchain technology, how can Web3 complete this cycle and truly make sustainability, how can we make sustainability or positive impact more sustainable? That's what our perspective is. Now, to get into the matter of the talk that itself, we'll skip over this. The first thing that I want to do is I want to acknowledge some of these first order benefits that blockchain has. I was at another refi event actually last week, and we were having a ton of conversations about just what blockchain technology as a technology can do for sustainability, for carbon markets. First we have this idea of digital MRV. For anyone not familiar, MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification. It's this idea that we have, fairly antiquated carbon markets. Everything is paper-based. Everything's very isolated. Wouldn't it be so much better if we could digitize that? Carbon markets and the refi space, it's very, sometimes it's rather obscure. It's not very transparent. Blockchains can provide transparency. This idea of a public ledger, public accountability. We can use blockchain to make these things more transparent. We can use blockchain to make these things more verifiable. Once I commit to something, it can always be checked, it can always be verified, no one can ever tamper with it into the future. And then finally, we've got this idea of just interoperability. Instead of siloed marketplaces where you can't move credits from point A to point B, we have blockchains that are able to connect to each other, seamlessly interoperate. It was actually one of the big accomplishments, I would say, from the event a number of us here were at last week as well. We had 6 different blockchain protocols all come together and commit to building a cross-chain solution so we could all more seamlessly transfer carbon credits amongst 6, I think, very exciting different blockchain protocols. So those are like the hard benefits, the technical benefits, or what I'm going to refer to as like the first order advantages of using blockchain technology for refi, carbon markets, everything like that. That's the first order, and then we need to ask ourselves the question, is this enough? Are these, 10%, 20%, maybe even 30, 40% incremental gains that we can make with the technology enough to get us to where we need to go? I think everyone here today, everyone tuning in is interested in this because we all, we feel that urgency. We know that this is not just something that we can keep talking about forever. There's urgency. This is a big issue. This is a generationally defining issue. Pick your fun, aggressive, appropriately urgent phrasings as you want. So is this enough? And our perspective is, that $270 billion, and this is the amount of value, I think, as of June, that's represented in all carbon credits. And this sounds like a big number, like, wow, $270 billion in a bank account, or, funding a singular project, that feels like a lot. But on a global scale, it's really quite small. I got this really interesting example from Visual Capitalists. They just have really great visualizations on how to think about markets and monies and size. What we have represented here is $100 billion. And these are really small, really random things. This giant chunk we have down in one corner was just the budget for the Tokyo Olympics. We have, the city of Chicago, which is not that big of a city, taking up a big chunk of this. And that's all $100 billion. It's not that much relative to, some really big financial markets, really big commodity markets that we have out there. So this is a little bit dated, so all of my Web3 native folks, the reason that the total cryptocurrency market cap is only 244 million is because this is from 2020. Obviously, that's quite a bit bigger now. But I think we can all acknowledge that the current crypto market cap of just over $920 billion, the fact that that's 4 times bigger than the market cap for all carbon, kind of cool for Web3, probably not all that great for the planet. And so we don't think, the 270 billion is enough, and we don't think just looking at Web3 from a technology perspective is going to be sufficient for what we need. And we really don't think it's going to be sufficient for what we need if we look at, the data, if we look at how this is going, but also if we look at how we like to talk about the space ourselves. I pulled this title kind of directly from an article title from, I think it was Stanford Nature's, Stanford University has a Nature magazine. And the title of the article was Global Carbon Emissions Need to Shrink 10 Times Faster. But if you go into that article, carbon emissions aren't shrinking. They're shrinking in 64 countries, but they're growing in 150 countries, and the amount of the countries that are increasing their carbon emissions are bigger than the amount of the countries that are reducing their carbon emissions. So this seems like a very strange title to me, that yes, some people are reducing, but globally we're not reducing, so we need to even do a lot more than just reduce faster. We need to actually start globally reducing, and we're not even there yet. And so if what we're doing today isn't working, and if those incremental technology gains are only going to be incremental, we think that we need to think bigger. We think that we need to start imagining things in a more radical way, in a more revolutionary way, and that is what Topple is really here today to be part of the conversation about. And so how are we thinking about going bigger, being more aggressive? Well, for those of you that were part of the workshop earlier, one of the questions is to say, well, can we think beyond just carbon credits? What else can we start incentivizing? What else can we start creating markets around? Can we think about biodiversity? Can we think about, land stewardship in a more inclusive way? Can we think about the water cycle? Can we think about all of these other areas that are so critical, but maybe we just haven't figured out a way to create markets around them yet? And if there's hopefully one thing that, can be apparent or can be a takeaway for anyone getting into Web3, is Web3 excels at creating markets. Web3 excels as an infrastructure for us to get those financial building blocks, like those Lego blocks, to create new governance structures, new incentive structures, new ways to drive profit, drive capital into the places where we want it to go. So that's one area of thinking bigger. Another area of thinking bigger is, well, let's think about what the carbon price does over time. Right now, we're all very focused on saying hey, the carbon price isn't good enough today, but the carbon price is going to increase over time. And therefore, we're going to be able to hit our commitments because carbon is going to be more, a ton of carbon is going to have a better price in the future. But if we pause for a second, and if we think about why we don't like carbon, we don't dislike carbon because, we think it's a bad thing, we want it to go away. We don't like carbon because it's damaging. And that damage accrues over time. So 1 ton of carbon avoided or captured today is more valuable to us. It does less damage to our communities. It does less damage to the planets than 1 ton of carbon captured or avoided in year 99. So we've started playing around with the idea, and this is why we're talking to all of you, because we want feedback, we want engagement, we want thoughts. We're starting to toy around with this notion of carbon inflation. And because you can program tokens, you can program money on the blockchain, you can capture a carbon credit on the blockchain, and you can have it actually grow or expand over time. So it's not just carbon anymore, it's like a carbon damage unit. And that damage that's being done to the environment is growing over time. It's growing for every year, every amount of time that that carbon still remains uncaptured or unavoided. And we refer to this as carbon inflation. We have no idea, if it makes sense. We know we're blockchain experts. We know we're pretty good at the sustainability things, but we know that there are people in the audience, people listening, people out there in the community that are, experts that have been 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades in, doing actual, like on-the-ground conservation work or modeling these things as economists, and that's what we want to invite better into the Web3 space. We've got exciting ideas. We've got ideas that we think could be totally, totally awesome, but there's a lot of expertise, and we think the Web3 space can, should, and needs to benefit from that expertise. And that then leads me to, okay, I thought I had an ask slide, but apparently it's not here, so I just will remember what my, I'd say 3 asks for everyone are. The first ask is, find anyone in the blue t-shirts today and, maybe give us some feedback, give us your thoughts on this, crazy new idea of carbon inflation. That's ask number 1. Ask number 2 is if you are working on something in the refi space or something with biodiversity or some form of positive impact, and you're interested in tokenizing that or being able to monetize that, what is important for you? What would the right solution for that be? Because building in silos, building in locked off closets can be fun, but ultimately not very valuable if you're not having those conversations. So if you're tokenizing something other than carbon, what's important to you? And the final ask that I have for everyone is to acknowledge, or hopefully we can all start to internalize together, this feeling of urgency, this feeling that, yes, while the approaches we've taken over the last 20, 30, 40 years they're amazing, they're valiant, they should be commended, they haven't been enough thus far. It's time for us to start thinking more radically. It's time for us to start thinking about this from a more revolutionary perspective. And I think that's what all of us are hopefully here today, hopefully here in the space to start doing, start thinking about. So that's my final ask to you. And then I will just, I guess, maybe I've got a minute or 2 for questions, but thank you all for coming out, and thank you all for your interest and your excitement in refi sustainability and saving the planet together. Thanks, everyone.